TalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery. Enjoy a survey of inspiring topics such as abundance, intention, health, manifestation, love, and transformation. It's all right here. Leading authors, speakers, coaches, entrepreneurs with stories and messages to support your well-being, let alone your most evocative dreams.
Hey, it's another groovy day, and today is really groovy. There's a lot going on today. There's a lot of twos in today's date, and when it gets to be 2/22, oh my gosh, the whole world will just open up. And we have a great message for you today that you can use to help support all of that awakening. So it's going to be really cool. We have a really cool show for you today, but it's also a groovy day because when I got up this morning, I decided it was going to be that way. Before my feet hit the ground, I already decided it was a groovy day, no matter what happened, no matter what comes my way. And then I can always think back and think, wow, I started off a groovy day. I can make it groovy now. All I got to do is change my thoughts, think back, move on, and deal with whatever was dealt me. And it always works. And it puts a smile on my face. And look, Jackie's smiling. I already got her inspired. As always, I have my co-host with me today, Jackie Bailey. She is an awesome chick, and she does some awesome things for some awesome kids, and she makes an awesome difference in the world. Did I overuse awesome at all?
I think so, a little bit, maybe though.
Hi, Jackie.
Hello. Hey, you know what?
What?
I'm part of a new compilation book that just was published this week. It's called Heart Notes. And it's an anthology of a bunch of different people that have written a love note to some part of themselves or some part of their life. And so it's called Heart Notes, and I'm delighted to be part of that.
Now you got to tell us what love letter you wrote. This is cool. You're going to really dig this, and you're going to want to get this book just to read this.
I wrote a love letter to Lack, breaking up with him. Because it's time for the relationship to end with my thoughts of lack.
Cool. Where did you get that idea from? Did it just come to you, or?
No, well, it's something that I've been struggling with over the last, few years, and trying to change my mindset and change my thought processes and live more abundantly and see more abundance in my life. And so it's time to break off this horrible romance I've had with lack. So that's what I wrote about.
That's amazing. That just sold the book right there to me. I got to check this out. I got to read this. This is going to be really good.
Yeah.
How are things at the Speak Feed Lead project?
Oh, that's another exciting thing happening. So as you know, many people know March 8th is International Women's Day. And Kimberly Crow, who runs the Entrepreneurs Rocket Fuel, it's programs and a website, and she has hosted this Voices of Women Summit for a couple of years now. And this year she came to the Speak Feed Lead project and said, we want to have an entire track where girls aged 10 to 20 can speak on this International Women's Day Summit. And I got excited about it, and I started asking all of my female students, hey, you want to be part of this? And then we branched out to their friends and people that they knew. And right now we have about 16 to 17 speakers, with more to come. And they are excited about the messages that they have to share on an international stage for the very first time in their life, and getting really excited about the opportunity. And we've had wonderful sponsors. It's cost $49 for each of these girls to participate. And we've had more sponsors than speakers come through to help these girls speak up.
That is so cool. And we
really
might preface it with the Speak Feed Lead project is all about helping the young people find their voice and speak their voice and discover that they have a voice and they can speak it. And boy, that is so cool. That is awesome. What kinds
It
of
is.
do you have any idea what kinds of things that they will be?
Oh, yeah. One of the girls is talking about self-defense for girls and women. She's a Taekwondo expert. So I think the title of her talk is going to be something like from Taekwondo to Taekwondo, and how to empower your voice as well through self-defense. And then someone else is going to be talking about the ups and downs of overconfidence, and how sometimes being confident can help us, but there's also times when it can undermine our success when we begin comparing ourselves to other people and that kind of thing. So that's going to be really cool to hear. We also have, we've got a young girl whose mother went to school in Africa and was challenged a lot with inequality as far as girls' education versus the education the boys were getting. And so she's going to talk about that and compare her mother's education to her own, and opportunities that we all have to get more educated and to gain more knowledge no matter what. So that's going to be really cool.
You know, kids are such creative little buggers. It's just amazing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That'd be worth it. So if you see somebody that looks like me wearing a wig, you won't narc me off, right?
Oh, you can come to the summit.
Okay.
You can
I thought it was
attend.
a
You just
women's
can't speak. You just can't speak, but you can attend it.
Okay. Just making sure. I want to remind our listeners that today's show page is at www.lifemasteryradio.net. We have do I want to say blurb? We have a little write-up about our guest today with all the links to find her, because you're going to want to find her after the show today. Trust me. And while you're on that page, you can sign up for our newsletter. Jackie writes a newsletter once a week, and it highlights who's coming on the show, who's been on the show, and a blog post, her insights, her take on what we talked about. So it's pretty cool. And you can get that once a week. That's all we use that email address for, is that newsletter. So sign up for it. There are also links there to both of our books. I don't see your book in the background, Jackie. She has it handy. You can find the link to both our books, Self-Centered Leadership and Heart Notes. Oh man, she one-upped me. That means I got to write another book. I got to get it out. But 6 Keys to Life Mastery is there. You can follow the link, and it's a really cool book too. It was written for young people, so check that out. And I think that's it. Anything else, Jackie?
I think you covered it well. Yes.
You ready for another groovy show with a
Well, you know
hit?
what? This is 2/2/22, and we've got a real magical message today on this magical day that is going to help us to know how to manifest some changes in our world.
Stick around. I think the topic for today is unity, and we're going to talk about that. But let me introduce our guest. Our guest today is Elena Mustakova, and she is a spiritual educator, psychotherapist, coach, and social scientist who guides people toward living with depth, discernment, and ground in a meaningful relationship with our shifting planet. She helps people find wholeness and grasp the connection between their inner reality and the macro trends in our crisis-ridden world. Her spiritual activism is dedicated to integration in a time of fragmentation, to horizons of spiritual empowerment and conscious planetary citizenship. Elena, welcome to the show, my friend. Man, that is one heck of a bio, and it's really short. That's really cool. I found that on Amazon. I'm sure that you wrote it.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be with you and all your listeners today.
So just by looking at your name, is that Russian?
No, it's actually Bulgarian. Elena, as many of you know, is a very central figure in the Greek mythology. And so Elena is a very common name in East European cultures, but I happen to be from Bulgaria.
So you were born in Bulgaria?
Yes, indeed.
How did you get to the United States? I mean, we want just a little bit of your backstory. Is this an interesting saga?
Well, I guess every saga is interesting in its own way. Since I've spent quite a few decades accompanying other people's stories, I find everyone interesting and a source of learning. I grew up in communism, and my family was always persecuted and blacklisted. There was a lot of difficulties. But my parents did find creative ways to give me access to some travel. And so when the Berlin Wall came down, I had just found a way to leave with my son at the time. We had already left to do some work in Africa. And from there, I decided to go back to graduate school after my master's degree and pursue a doctorate. What really always interested me is human motivation, and particularly why we find it so hard to be really true to our deepest nature and deepest reality. And so that's what I wanted to investigate. That's what brought me to the US and back to graduate school. And so I came here in the US at the age of 30. And when I told my doctoral seminar professor and subsequently dissertation advisor what I'm here for, he just rolled his eyes. He said,
Wow.
That's what you're going to do for dissertation. What are you planning for the rest of your life? That's pretty big. And so we became friends afterwards. And
It is a big idea.
Well, it's something that's occupied all of my life as a educator. I've been a tenured professor for many years, as a clinician, as a coach, just as a human being. I think we're living in very exciting times now.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned the Berlin Wall. Look what I have.
Aha.
I have a piece of it. My daughter brought this back, and I cherish it. This is a representation of evolution, right? I mean, it's
yes,
clearly a sign that we're evolving towards something better. But, you know, in today's world, go ahead.
Don't understand what we're evolving towards. And I think that's where the conversation really begins to become interesting. That's what I find, and that's what moved me to write the book, Global Unitive Healing. When the pandemic began, I was acutely aware that after decades of working with people, that people just generally don't understand what's happening. And when you don't understand what's happening on a massive scale, it's a lot harder to know how best to deal with it, where to find your place, and how to be successful in these really difficult and turbulent times. So that propelled me to start writing this book.
Wow, very cool.
Well, it's interesting to me, Elena, that those of us that have been on this planet for a while, we have seen a lot of turmoil early on in our lives. I mean, I think in America, the 60s and 70s contained a lot of turmoil, and big changes were happening in our country regarding race relations and civil rights and that kind of thing. And the youth today haven't seen those big changes in society, except that now they're involved in what they think are these big changes. But from my perspective, we're moving backwards. We're moving backwards instead of forward. And I don't think the young people recognize where America has come from, and they look at the flaws instead of looking at what we actually have been able to accomplish in the last 100 years or whatever. And I think that's part of the lack of unity that we have, is because we've got these two different perspectives happening. And some of those perspectives are a little bit skewed. Am I off my rocker, or am I right?
I would agree with you that the processes that we're living in are so complex that there's different ways to look at them. I would say that what's happening now, this whole mess, the divisiveness, the antagonism, the hostilities, and actually even worse than that, is actually part of the evolutionary process that we're caught up in. And that while the 60s and the 70s were a very memorable time in this evolutionary process, we're living now in an even more exciting time, because what's having to evolve And I see many young people actually leading the way in that, particularly in the climate change movement, in the climate crisis movement, really. What's having to happen is we're having to figure out how to do something that humanity has never, ever done, which is to come together in our enormous diversity and complexity and find a common foundation out of which we can govern this planet without exploding it, without destroying it, which is now no longer the job of some big name organizations, because we've seen that many of them are just not up to the task. What's really happening, and that's so exciting, is that ordinary people are awakening to the direct connection between how we live our personal lives and what's happening on the planet, and the choice we each have to do something radically different for our grandchildren, because as it is, we're giving to our children a planet which is absolutely on the brink of disaster. And so being able to own our choices, being able to revisit and transform and move forward with this historical evolution requires a lot of new understanding. And the 60s and 70s made a huge step in the direction of unitive thinking. But then, as is always the case in history, there's dialectical processes. So every action brings on a reaction. And so reactive forces are really on the rise. But we also know from developmental psychology that thesis and antithesis then leads to a whole new level of synthesis. And that new level of synthesis, which we're waiting for, is actually a sustainable and regenerative planetary civilization.
Kind of like entropy, right?
I'm sorry?
Oh, I just said it's kind of like entropy, right? Good things come from total disorganization. Let's just hope we don't have to go far to the extreme.
Well, that's the choice of every one of us. That's where the conversation actually becomes meaningful now, because there's no big leaders or organizations that are going to rescue us. This is what we're used to. For the first time in the 60s, people realized, oh no, wait a minute, this is up to us. And they really started a movement, and that movement reverberated around the planet. Now we're in a much further chapter of that same movement. Now we have to really understand what in our ways is no longer sustainable and is actually participating in reproducing the crisis, and how to change that.
So during the pre-show, Jackie and I, we were talking and we came across, what was it, Jackie, that this belief system, Baha'i? Baha'i. So is that what Baha'i is all about? Is that a belief system? Can you explain that to us?
So the Baha'i faith is, first of all, the youngest global faith.
Right.
It began in the 19th century, but that's not mid-19th century. I don't really want to focus on religion at this time. What's more important is that this was a real
belief.
Well, I would say not really. It was a paradigm shift in thinking that occurred in the middle of the 19th century. And it's very interesting that at the time that this evolutionary spiritual understanding was being articulated in the Middle East, from which it spread globally and is now well represented at the United Nations, at the very same time in the US, on the other side of the planet, we saw the emergence of new thought, which led to unity churches and Unitarian Universalism. So apparently, this is what happens with the evolution of collective consciousness. When the time comes, these forces are released and they manifest somewhat differently in different parts of the world, but they're pointing to the same core processes.
That makes total sense. Very cool. So let's define unity then. Let's take that down to its core. And what is it that you mean when you speak about unity?
So that's a great question, and a question that's worth some very serious examination, which is really what I try to do with the book Global Unitive Healing. But in the essence of it is our ability to recognize that reality is unitary.
Mhm.
So reality is unitary, and our understanding of reality evolves. Our understanding of material reality evolves, our understanding of spiritual reality evolves, and none of it is absolute. We have different angles, different perspectives, okay? But reality is unitary. And so now we know that from quantum physics, we know that from science. This is no longer just the wisdom traditions pointing to that. And wisdom traditions have always pointed to that. Every historical religion in the history of civilization, including the Baha'i faith, has pointed to the unitary nature of reality. But what's different now is that it is time for us to evolve socially, to act in accordance with that unitary nature of reality, because our science, our technology, our trade, everything else is now global. And if we're still acting as though we can pull towards our corner, we are producing a planet that's ready to collapse. Right. So if it's unitary reality, we all have to work together to find ways that work for everybody, for the planet. But that's very challenging. Right. Because we each come from different partial perspective, different partial belief systems, different partial interests and understanding. And so then what is the evolutionary challenge of this time? And that's really important to hear clearly, is for each and every one of us to cleanse our particular belief system and way of living of anything that contradicts the unitary nature of reality. And
okay, so I'm confused. Let me I'm trying to define in my mind unitary reality. Is that essentially meaning that we as a human race depend on each other? Is that what that means?
That is one way to understand it, a very fundamental way to understand it, that we are all interconnected. Of course, quantum physics is telling us that we all live in an energetic field, vibrational field, and that we're constantly influencing each other, and that the nature of reality, that's quantum physics speaking now, as have wisdom traditions, is actually consciousness. That consciousness precedes matter, and consciousness is an evolutionary phenomenon. Consciousness evolves, individual and collective consciousness evolves, and that is a unitary process. Now, that evolution oftentimes happens through all kinds of tensions and clashes and contradictions, which, however, become absolutized and become a problem if we don't understand that they're part of an evolutionary process. It's like a marriage. Now think of a marriage. You know, two partners each have their truth and they're clashing who's right and who's wrong, when in reality, each one of them has a perspective on reality that's valid and also has a skewed narrative which they cannot see is skewed because it's their reality. Right. But as they work with each other, and maybe with the help of a therapist, they begin to separate that within their perception and experience, which is foundational and should not be given up, from that which is the skewed story that has more to do with the personal history than with reality. Right. And that has to be transcended. Translate that into ideological, religious groups, social groups at this time. Everybody is helping, is putting forth some perspectives that have foundational value and validity, but these perspectives are often absolutized, like in an unsuccessful marriage, where people insist and groups insist that they are absolutely right, which makes the other groups absolutely wrong. Now, the way of unity that I write about, the way of unity that was first, this impulse was first released into the world in the middle of the 19th century, not because it wasn't understood earlier by wisdom traditions, but because people were not mature and ready for it. In the middle of 19th century, we have the science, the technology, the discoveries that really made it a unified planet in that way. And now our consciousness has to catch up. So the way of unity is opening up spaces which are essentially very deeply consultative spaces where people learn how to listen to each other's perspective and experience, recognize that which is foundational there and really has to be validated and respected. And then as they each speak and listen to each other, it becomes evident what is the common foundational ground and what is a little bit of noisy insistence that maybe has to go by the wayside. And that's the way in which solutions emerge, which are actually unitive solutions and therefore are sustainable and work for everybody. Now, that's a profound process, and it takes a deep spiritual commitment to engage in this kind of process. It also takes the willingness for us to examine out of what beliefs we're living.
Right.
Are we living out of the belief that my group is superior to X other groups? Or are we recognizing that each of us are on a learning curve?
Right.
Do we practice self-reflection? Do we notice our ways of disunity in our daily lives? Are we willing to take stock? Because we all practice disunity. Let's face it, nobody's got it down. We're all learning in this. We're all evolving. And the important thing is not that we can be aggressive, self-centered,
judgment plays a role.
Judgmental, overbearing, excessively competitive. The problem is not that. The problem is that we're often not taking the time to take stock of those moments and then to actually determine how we can change them. Because we all slip, and it's all a journey. It's really a developmental journey. I forgot to say that my background is in adult developmental psychology, which really informs everything I'm speaking of, because the collective development / evolution very much parallels the individual development in the adult lifespan that I witness every day in my clinical practice and also in my educational work.
So the way of unity, I know in your book you have 4 awarenesses, should I call them, or a 4-step process. But the way of unity is an education. What do I want to say here? Is it's a practice.
So it's definitely a practice, and it is a educational, psychological, and spiritual practice to which every person can come from their own background, from their own understanding and comfort level. But when you look at the skills, the unitive skills that are outlined at the end of chapter 6, they fall into 4 categories. Internal skills, how we understand and bring ourselves to account. Interpersonal skills, how we learn to be less divisive and more moving our interpersonal relationships towards unitive ground. Then there are skills connected to our objective understanding of reality, of religion, of culture, of politics, of science, if you will, as well. So that's the 3rd group, objective understanding. And the 4th group is skills for collective social evolution, the social evolution of large bodies. How do we participate in that? So how does the average American, for example, participate in the evolution of this amazing country from chaos, hostility, and even fascism on the rise to a whole new level of democracy? Everybody participates. These are evolutionary, social evolutionary skills. And whether we realize it or not, we're participating. If we're not conscious, if we're not consciously part of the solution, we're part of the problem.
Well, Elena, I think it's so important that you mentioned listening. In fact, I think the
I was going there too.
the first chapter is about listening. And I don't feel like we're doing that much anymore. In fact, I feel like people are going, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear what
I'm right, Jackie.
I don't want to hear what you have to say because you offend me. And you say, you make me feel bad. And so I'm not going to listen to you anymore. And so I believe if we are ever going to be able to be unified as a country, or
as a people,
we've
Yeah.
got to stop wanting to be right and just wanting to show respect and understanding and listen to what other people have to say. We don't have to believe them. We don't have to feel like they're trying to convince us to have an open heart as to what their perspective is, because I believe that everybody else's perspective is going to deepen our own. Even if we don't believe what they're saying is right, their perspective is important enough for us to hear.
well, that's where we get different ideas, right, Elena? I mean, how else do we formulate what it is that we believe unless we hear what other people believe too, and use, what is it, discernment to
I
understand?
love that word. Love that word.
You know, it's wonderful that you're pointing to this current condition, and where people are plugging their ears and just yelling out loudly enough their truth. That's the reason why we have 50% divorce rate, because we're not able to, or we're scared to listen to each other, thinking we're somehow going to lose our identity. What's really beautiful about unitive processes is not only do we not lose our identity when we listen deeply, we expand and enrich it. And we have less reason to be on the defensive when we listen deeply. So I'm very glad you keyed in on that very central first step.
And we learn it about other people too, right? What's important to them when we don't pass judgment, and we listen and we understand where that person's coming from, rather than judging them and say, oh, you're just a wackadoodle, you're just out there, I don't even want to hear what you have to say.
And you said a very important word there. When we listen, we also discern. We discern that which is essential, that has to be honored and validated and respected, and that which may be just defensive mechanisms, and we don't need to get stuck on it.
Well, that's the problem I think I see in our youth, is with the advent of social media. They don't have the experience of discernment, and they buy into things that are, like, we might think are just completely ridiculous and wrong. But what's happening with even a lot of adult people I know is they're tuning out of the people who love them most, and their discernment is following a narrative that's being spoken by something that's probably not true. and yet they can't discern between the two. And so they're losing friendships, they're losing family, but they're navigating toward like conspiracy theories and things like that. And I think that's maybe being driven by fear.
What we learned on our last show, which just blew me away. And that's, what did she call it? Self-deletion.
Yeah. Self-deleting. Yeah.
Self-deleting.
Take our own lives now as being self-deleted. Yeah.
It's very dramatic, the trends that we're witnessing, and can be quite scary. I always try to help the people I'm in connection with and people that I work with to focus on what are the constructive trends that we see, because those are the ones that usually don't hit the media and take a lot more discernment to actually see. But some of the very constructive trends are, yes, many young people get lost in their iPhones, but also many, maybe even more, are using their social media in order to uphold a greater sense of visibility, justice, social movements, climate change, to put pressure on governments, to really expose corruption. It's very impressive, the power of social media to keep us conscious and aware. And as every great power has its own dark side and liability, so does social media. A lot of addiction.
Everything has a bookend, right? I mean, there's this end and there's this end, and finding that happy medium. I think that's what our evolution is about, right, Elena? I mean, it's finding that middle ground to where we survive.
And that middle ground keeps shifting as the complexity of our societies increases. So what used to be middle ground even 30 years ago is no longer middle ground now. And so that evolutionary process, when people understand it, when young people understand it, they tend to get a lot less disoriented. So I would say what's the middle ground now is anything that fosters meaningful, deep, and essentially unitive conversations out of which some viable solutions can emerge, because we have some major problems in front of us now and a timeline that is pretty tight to resolve these problems. And just today we're on the brink of another war in Europe. So this is not indefinite, it is now. And so the middle ground right now is a whole new developmental level of how we think about our lives, about the skills that we bring to the table, about impact, about feeling whole and fulfilled in difficult times. That's what the bottom line is. People want to feel whole. People want to feel that
recognized, validated. Validated is another big one.
Yes, absolutely. And we all want to feel like our lives are good, essentially. And what does that mean now? How do you feel whole in a world that's absolutely rocking and is about to go to war? How do you feel whole?
You find the solution. You find the tribe that believes what you believe, right? And then you become even more divided.
Yeah, that's
well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, isn't it true that because we have this collective consciousness, what I see from a lot of people is they have this desire to belong to a community, right?
Of course,
Todd just called it a tribe. We have that ingrained desire to be part of something. And when we start to feel like this tribe that perhaps is our heritage or the family of our origin, right? We start to feel like, oh, they're not my tribe any longer, or this church is no longer my tribe any longer. They always seek for another community to join. And I think the danger that we can often find with that desire so deep is that we start to believe things that we don't, or we go along with things that we know aren't really right, or that aren't authentic for us, but because we want so badly to be part of this group, we just go along and we actually self-silence. We don't say, we don't speak up, right? Isn't that a problem?
It's a very, very important thing that you're bringing to the fore about the need to belong to communities. What I'll say in response to both what you put forth and what Todd was saying before that about finding the middle ground is that the times are such that now we have the choice to either find a community that already exists so we can belong to it, and that brings with it the liabilities of maybe I'm buying into things that I'm not discerning very well.
Right.
Or there's another choice, and that is to create communities of a new kind, communities that are communities of spiritual action, communities that are essentially unitive, that bring together people from very different backgrounds and very different commitments, but that are all trying to create viable communities, not communities that will further divide a splintered planet, but viable unitive communities. And in fact, I wanted to say to your listeners that that's exactly what I wrote my today's blog on medium.com about. It's called, I forget the name of it already, Unprecedented Spirit-Filled Solutions. Yes.
There you go.
And the whole blog is about this alternative option that more and more people are participating in, creating communities of a new kind that don't involve us just squeezing ourselves to fit in and playing into the divisiveness. So these communities are emergent all over the globe. I would encourage people to go to Elena-Mustakova at elena-mustakova.medium.com, read this little piece, it's a 3-minute read, and then ponder that, respond, put forth your thoughts, because it is up to each one of us. These communities of spiritual action, which is how I'm calling them, they're essentially unitive communities, are emerging all over the globe. And they are very, very, very diverse. Culture, religion, political orientation, ethnicity, ages, everything, they're very diverse. But they all understand that our existing groupings just are not working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have to be really, really resourceful, and leaders are not going to do it. We are going to do it.
Yeah, that was going to be my next comment. But Jackie, you got that link, right? We're going to put that link in the newsletter. Yep. If you didn't get it, and it will be on, send it to me, Jackie, since you have it bookmarked, and I'll make sure it gets on today's show page. But that was going to be my next thought or comment. So, Elena, what I'm gathering is it's up to us, and each individual plays a huge part in this evolution, correct?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, that's what it all boils down to. And just with your process, what you blogged about today is bringing people together. You know, I thought it was really interesting. I listened to a podcast you did with a woman, Sister Jenna.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
And she made the comment, she said, you know, I really like to be in the presence of people that think differently than I do. Mm-hmm. I love that, because that's where she formulates her thoughts and ideas and what she believes in, and how she works in her reality, right?
Yes. And, you know, I want to keep coming back to this phrase that you also are using. That's how she formulates what she believes in. And what's very characteristic of those people who understand the evolutionary nature of our times is they understand that even our beliefs have to evolve.
That's how we grow, right? Isn't that how we grow?
What we believe, what we've come to believe, is not necessarily ultimate truth. It's just our current level of understanding. And if we keep exposing ourselves to deep conversations, we don't have to adopt anybody else's beliefs, of course, but in these deep conversations, our current level of understanding evolves and our beliefs become more comprehensive. In the second chapter of Global Unitive Healing, I actually describe the developmental helix, in which each next stage of thinking, understanding, and development encompasses the previous stage, but is more comprehensive. Yeah. So even our beliefs, we don't have to hold them as though, you know, they are the difference between us living or drowning. They are a map. A map is not reality. We know what a map is. It helps you orient, but it's not the same as reality. So beliefs help us orient how we position ourselves, how we approach things. They're a very important aspect of identity and personality. And we also have to allow these things to keep being open to evolution.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody state that so eloquently. Really, that was beautiful. We might have to transcribe that and put that up somewhere, Jack, because that was a great definition, I think.
Yeah. Well, and my mind went to, as you talk about an evolutionary process, you can compare it, I think, to the way that we raise children. If we were to compare the way that children mature and the way that our global community matures, I think you can draw comparisons, because I know that when I was a young mother and I had these young children, I wanted them to play with children like them, right? Because if they were playing with older children, then they were going to learn things that they weren't ready yet to handle. They like words and language and take risks doing behaviors that they weren't quite ready for yet. But then there was a point when you had to say, as you say, go hang out with people who think differently than you. Once your value system is built and it's ingrained in you, you know who you are and you have a good sense of that. Now go out, get to know other people, listen to them, and decide what's the course you're going to take now. That's what college is all about, right? Is getting there, listening to opposing views, learning what you're going to do, what your future is going to hold based on this information that you're gaining. And so our country kind of maybe is in that position right now, or maybe the world is in that position right now where we're in the college age of our planet's evolution. And yet we're finding it hard to let go, perhaps, of the rules-based, these are the only people that I can hang out with. Mm-hmm. And realizing that there's actually more that we can gain by actually hanging out with people who are different than us. Is that possible?
You know, you're making an excellent point there, and I just want to take for a moment to work with that. The belief system that is now emerging both from advanced spiritual understanding and from physics is that we need our diversity. That diversity is the nature of life, and that as we interact within the diversity, this is actually the most beneficial way to grow up. So when our daughter, who is now 22, was a little girl, she was always part of extremely diverse spiritual communities. So her girlfriends were girls from every part of life and every ethnic and racial background.
That's cool.
And she grew up with the understanding of it's one human family in all of its diversity. That became a foundational belief for her. And so she learned to appreciate these different people with their different ways and to find way to be with all of them. And so this is what we're evolving towards. We no longer have to limit our children to their kind. Of course, using good judgment about age differences, I completely agree with you as a mom on that importance, but within thoughtful age parameters, to expose our children to genuine diversity, to the genuine diversity of the human family, and help them appreciate how much they gain from these friendships and how much they learn, makes it so much easier as young adults for them not to be defensive, to not be aggressive towards differences, but to really see the richness and the wisdom of that. And that's where the unity principle of reality, when it's translated into a belief system, is actually very advanced evolutionarily. And that's what started to happen in the middle of the 19th century. And that's what the spiritual understanding was, that really religion is one in all of its historical diversity. It is the relationship between the soul, the individual soul, and the unknowable essence of, however we want to refer to it, God, reality, spiritual reality. That it's a relationship, and this relationship has been guided by different historical traditions very effectively, and sometimes not so effectively when we have misinterpreted things and turned them into shields. But to understand the unitive principle that physical and spiritual reality are one, we have to pay attention to the spiritual significance of every material act. Religion is one. Human family is one, and we are evolving together and interdependently. If we don't survive, we all don't survive. And so on. The unitive principle on every level can really inform a whole new level of education, growing up, being in the social world. And it actually has, because it's permeated the thinking of people all over the world now. I see it a lot.
You know, that was something that came to my mind as you talked about religion, and religion itself is evolving. I don't think as many people are attracted to it these days. And, you know, I wrote in my book, religion was kind of hard for me because as a kid, you know, we were drilling for oil where hell was and shooting rockets into heaven. And that just, it didn't click with me. And I think a lot of people feel that way today as well. We have this main book, probably the most popular book ever written, and it's got some great teaching stories, but yet they don't seem to identify with it.
You know, what you just said, religion itself is evolving. It's absolutely part of the unitive nature of reality. Everything evolves. Humanity evolves. Religion evolves. Our understanding evolves. Everything evolves. That doesn't mean that what's evolving is our understanding and how socially we translate things into reality. They're universal spiritual principles that are consistent throughout wisdom traditions, and you find the same universal spiritual principles in the Baha'i faith. In fact, people who have this spiritual orientation will say it's just a new dispensation. It's not a new religion. There's one religion and it evolves, and it really is a next stage in the understanding of spiritual evolution, which focuses on the universal spiritual principles that cut through, and if we look carefully, we can find them. And these are universal spiritual principles that are like the laws of physics. You know, if you're going to jump out of the 5th floor, you know what's going to happen. Well, if you run against spiritual principles, they have as clear-cut consequences as any physical law. And so if we grasp that and start to live and be with each other based on these universal principles, whether you derive them from your commitment to the humanities, from Christianity, from being an enlightened Buddhist, or being an agnostic, as we start to speak to each other based on these universal spiritual principles and recognize that they're just as binding for life as the law of gravity is, we start to really hear each other and we start to see what works. And that's
and then a lot of the belief system is the same.
Yes. Right. Or it's compatible. At least.
Well, we can define it, or we can identify with it. Yeah. We only have, oh my gosh, ladies, we only have about 5 minutes left, but we talked about a couple of things today, Elena, that I just kind of wanted to get your take on, and that is, I'm just fascinated by what the ancients believed and what the ancients thought. And here we are today coming to realize that their practices, their beliefs, what they thought are kind of a truth. Do you find that fascinating as well, that it's all come full circle?
It is, human civilization has been in a collective unitary process from the beginning. That's not to say everything they believed and everything they practiced.
True, yeah.
But there is a core understanding that has been both continuous and evolving. And that's why it's so important for us to think in terms of human civilization, not my little tribe over here. Human civilization in its evolutionary understanding has to survive. What is my role? What is your role in that? What are we going to do today, tomorrow?
Yeah. Together. What are we going to do together?
Together. Thank you so much. Together. Yes.
Well, and the other thing that we talked about that I find fascinating, there's two things that I just find, and that is the confirmation that quantum physics is giving us to our reality, right? Or to what led those ancients to believe in what they believed. And here today we have science confirming it.
Mm-hmm. It's very fascinating. And that's another aspect of unity, actually. The unity of science, scientific, and spiritual understanding. I forgot to mention that, so I'm very grateful that you pointed us in that direction. That's another aspect of unity. So scientific understanding without spiritual understanding becomes very arrogant and reductionistic. Spiritual understanding without scientific understanding becomes fanatical and dogmatic. But as spiritual and scientific understanding collaborate and serve as a reality check for each other, you have real solutions. Mm-hmm. Probably the environmental movement is the clearest example of real solutions that emerge from the interaction between scientific and spiritual understanding. And that's exactly what happens in these communities of spiritual action that I wrote about. They really bring those two perspectives, engage them equally seriously, and hold the conversation open.
Well, it gives validation, right? There's another way of validating what's being presented to me, and see, you can make your own judgment or your own discernment about what it is that is occurring. And this one validates the other, and it's just it totally, I'm totally fascinated with that. So thank you for right. I haven't read the book word for word, but I can guarantee you this much: I will read your book word for word because it's fascinating. And that's a cue for you to hold the book up. We haven't really done that yet or talked about it, but this is the book.
Here it is.
Global Unitive Healing, and Elena is the author, and I'm so delighted that you were able to come on the show today and share your thoughts and ideas. And I am just amazed and so grateful that you have brought this message or this way of thinking to the world.
You know, I'm also very grateful for the work that you are doing. Your team is bringing light, understanding, opening this exactly the kind of spaces that we're talking about. So yours is a very significant service. And so thank you very much for what you're doing. And thank you for having me on your show.
You're welcome. And Elena, the beauty that I feel from your message today is that diversity unites us. It's
Yes.
not the other way around. However, we do have to be finding the common ground with ourselves and other people for that to really work. Right?
Thank you. That's a wonderful takeaway message. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Any other takeaways, Jackie? That was awesome. And for our listeners, Jackie's gonna be writing an awesome blog post of her insights that we got from today and enticing you to listen to. If you tuned in a little bit late, go back and listen to the beginning, because this was a really cool show. Thank you
Lots
so
to
much.
chew on and think about for sure.
That's
you,
about it.
friends.
Go. What was that?
Thank you, friends. I want to thank you.
Thank
This was
you.
a wonderful conversation. I'm assuming that it's recorded on Facebook, is it?
Yep.
Mhm. Yep.
It's on Facebook and it will be on YouTube and it will go out to the world on many platforms.
Great.
iHeartRadio,
Wonderful.
YouTube.
Much gratitude to you. Again, you are doing the education and enlightenment work for the planet. So that's very important. Thank you very, very much.
Well, most importantly, we have fun. Did you have fun today, Elena?
Yes, surely. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, friends.
That's about all we have time for
Yeah.
today. I hope you enjoyed the show, and please tell a friend about the show. We have
You
some
bet.
amazing guests and we just have a blast. Lastly, please, please, please make it a great day, because it is all about choice. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning